Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
But I want to get just what I call rapid fire.
Sure.
James's take on a couple of business ideas. We're going to give them away, as you love to do. Give away $10 million ideas on a daily basis on Instagram and on your podcast. First idea, you could just do, kind of Roman gladiator, thumbs up, thumbs down, verbally.
And by the way, I might be wrong, right? Like,
no. Just this is purely about James. It's not about absolutely. Okay. So we already did Zoom Comedy Club. It sounds like that is a good idea. People are doing it, not necessarily you. Okay.
By the way, I don't think Zoom comedy clubs are a good idea. It remains to be seen. But what's interesting there is that happens often in innovation. And sorry, this interrupts the rapid fire flow.
That's
but
fine.
What's interesting about innovation is Zoom was meant to have remote meetings with like 4 or 5 people. They didn't expect a lockdown that would force 3 billion people to start using Zoom to do all their, not only office meetings, but Zoom didn't expect there to be opera singers doing events on Zoom for hundreds of people, or comedy events, or even podcasts. Like, Zoom wasn't really made for podcasts. We're lucky there hasn't been an outage on either side, but podcasting software should have audio recording on both sides and other features. And so there's room for a lot of innovation here. And just knowing that there's Zoom events, I wouldn't make a comedy event software, but there's ideas in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like ticketing on top of Zoom. So idea sex between ticketing software and video conferencing software. There's something there, for instance.
So next idea is a crossover between the show you had involvement with, Billions, and then, remember back in the 70s, you had like The Facts of Life and what was the other one? What's Happening? And they'd have a crossover, when we were kids, and there'd be like Roger and Rerun would go on with Mandy and Candy, whatever their names were. I used to watch that. Billions and Succession. Would that be a show you'd want to watch? Crossed over. Hybrid.
Yeah, imagine the family. Imagine the family is a big investor with Axe Capital.
Yeah.
So, and then there's a little bit of falling out because Axe pulls out of the media company, that the Roy family owns. I forgot the name of the media company. So
A-Star Global or whatever.
Right. So the main guy, Logan Roy is the main guy.
Yep.
So Logan says to Axe, screw it. I had $2 billion in your fund. I'm pulling it all out. So now, on the one hand, Axe has to scurry around town to raise money to meet some kind of margin call, and now the Connor, the stupid Roy, he wants to start a hedge fund. He thinks he can do it, and his dad has to keep Connor happy a little bit, and maybe he gives Connor a little bit in the hedge fund.
And then Paul Giamatti comes in for antitrust, right?
Right. So then Axe gets back at the Roy family for setting up Connor on an insider trading deal. Like Axe says, look, Connor, you want to impress your dad, I'm going to give you a tip. Play it small, be careful. And then Axe leaks it to Paul Giamatti. This guy Connor is doing insider trading. And so that distracts Paul Giamatti, and it brings down Connor, and it distracts Logan Roy. And boom, you have a great episode.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a thumbs up. Next one, podcast where you have authors who go on and they don't know who the host is going to be, but it's hosted by verified purchasers on Amazon who gave the book a 1-star review.
I like that. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a fun idea. That would be a good concept. But after the first episode, they'll kind of know the setup. Unless what you do is you it's like a seasonal thing.
Yeah.
And so you do one season, you record it all in advance, and then
series. Yeah.
The next season will be some other twist on authorship. So,
and it can't be like ad hominem. It has to like their name, verified name. They can't be trolls.
Right. So yeah, maybe there's got to be a season 2, a season 3 where you change the structure somewhat, or else people know.
It could be 5-star and then like some like really awful author or something like that. But yeah, I like the 1-star, but it has to be verified, because it's like, if it's not verified, there's no stakes in it, right? So anyone can say whatever they want. It's like a troll, license to troll.
Yeah.
But this way, like, or next year, like anyone who comes out, they have to publish their home address or.
I like that as a 1-season thing. I'm trying to think of like what the second season could be.
See if we get funding for the first season. We just have like 100 episodes in the first season.
Yeah.
Release them all at once. Next one. Least active social media platform for trolls? I think it's LinkedIn, but what do you think it is? Like where you feel safest to say whatever the hell? Like I've never been trolled on LinkedIn. Where do you think is the safest place to go on? Like the place you never worry you're going to get, like you get like stupid, threats or stupid things on Twitter every single day. And I love the way you respond to it. Like you're obviously so much smarter than I am. I want to subscribe to your newsletter and join your retreat. But what's the most friendly social media platform?
So by the way, with the best response, again, it's all about the second law of thermodynamics. It's like mixed with Taekwondo, right? So you want their energy, you want to use their energy against them. So they're attacking you so much, you just turn to the side, like, yeah, you're right. How about you make all of my tweets for me from now on? And then they're just lost. Then they fell.
I got a comment on my YouTube like, why didn't you ask this? It's like very clickbaity. And then how YouTube will tell you the subscriber and how many videos and followers they have. Yeah. It's like you're just trying to get followers. I'm unsubscribing, and the guy had like 0 followers. I was tempted to do the Altucher response, like, obviously I have much to gain from you, Sensei, but I was just like, I don't have time.
Yeah, sometimes it's just not worth it because you also don't want to lend the massive energy that you devoted to building your audience to this one person with 0 videos up there.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge. Usually you just want to ignore. But with least trolling, maybe LinkedIn, although I have been trolled there. I don't know if there are comments on Pinterest. I've certainly never, or there's also starting to be social networks where it's one to many. So people could sign up to be texted by me. And then there's in order for them to do that, they're buying into what I'm saying. So so far I haven't experienced trolling on stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next one has to do a little bit with trolling. And it's this concept of peer review. So we have peer review in science. It could be for refereed papers where you want to get them published. It could be for a grant proposal. And the question is, are we kind of past that? Like imagine in your comedy club, if all the audience were just other comics that were going on after, like they'd be total a-holes, maybe they wouldn't be, but can you imagine that?
They would be nice, but here's what would happen is they would be quiet because they're thinking about their material and they're dissecting your material. You'd have to be like exceptionally brilliant to get a room full of other comedians to laugh. And also then there's some competition and stuff, but those are they're not quite trolling or heckle. They're not going to heckle or anything, but they're not going to laugh. And they might say that's good or something like that. They'll like, indicate that something's funny, but it's hard for them to laugh.
Do they do that? I mean, do comedians like workshop or whatever with actual other comedians, like more than just a mentor or something? Like, do you ever do that? Would that be a good idea? If you're like the Lion's Den, just like one night, close the Comedy Store, close Stand Up New York to everybody but professional comics or amateur.
Yeah, or even take like pros like Kevin Hart. He's got a team of comedians that travel around with him and help him with all his jokes. I mean, I'm sure he's super funny without that, but that's what for a major performance with 30,000 people, he's got his team to help him. Probably Dave Chappelle is like that a little as well, and at that level, they're probably all like that to an extent.
Yeah. Okay. Next is this thing I sent you right before we started recording. It's this doll called Moxie. And you're a computer scientist. You've done a lot of programming. You're also a father. And in honor of Father's Day, we started talking about this project called Moxie, which if you go to their website and you click on it, it will say, and I'll put we have no affiliation, at least I don't, maybe, no, James has any affiliation. So it's called The Revolution in Child Development. And it's a doll, and the kid is like perfectly, beautiful kid is talking to this robot, and the robot's asking about his day. And it kind of made me think about like the Turing test, the famous Turing test, and whether or not, a human being can determine if they're talking to a sentient artificial intelligence, a Turing capable device. So what do you think about this? I'll put this in. Is it creepy or not?
It's creepy, but the interesting thing is that there used to be these things, I think they were called Yamagata dolls or something like that, or Tamagotchi, I don't know. And it would be like clearly not a real human. And, you'd give it to your child, and the child had to know when to feed it and bathe, put it to sleep and so on. And so, its idea was a fun kind of a slightly more advanced doll, and it would teach your kid responsibility. And this is almost like a super advanced version of that because it's got AI and it looks much more human-like. But in virtual reality, there's something called I think it's called Hidden Valley,
Uncanny Valley.
Uncanny Valley, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where
one of my researchers, friends here, works on that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the idea is your brain, like you're looking at it and you think, is this human? And then over a few minutes or a half hour, your brain realizes, oh, this is not something. I feel queasy. Like your brain knows it's not human, so it starts to feel sick, physically ill. Like if you're ever in a virtual reality for more than like 10, 15 minutes, you'll start to feel sick. Like I've given talks in virtual realities, and it's just like a very nauseating experience after a few minutes because you realize, your brain suddenly realizes this is not real, but I'm being told it's real. So there's this dissonance. And then the other thing is, like when I first watched that video that you showed me, I just felt sad for the kid.
Yeah,
like it didn't feel like a healthy thing. It reminded me of like that Peloton commercial where it just felt something was off. There was like some dissonance. There's a Peloton commercial where this woman is just like bicycling furiously all around her family all the time, and it was like there's something was off about how she was behaving.
Yeah, or like people are like, oh, she's being fat shamed. Like her husband gave it to her, and she's fat shamed. And it's like this gorgeous supermodel, woman. And I told that to one of my friends. He's not on social media. There's this huge uproar. Remember a couple months ago back. It's funny, like all the things that troubled us before coronavirus, like Soleimani was killed. Blah blah blah. That's awful. Or whatever. If you're an Iranian, or people, it's going to cause World War III. Or Peloton girl, fat shamed by her husband. I told it to one of my friends who's like anti-social media, doesn't even have an account. He's like, my wife bought me a Peloton. Like, I love the thing. Like, I'm hoping to drop a couple pounds. And he's in like great shape. He's like, right, I would love it.
The Peloton might be a great thing. It's just that the ad felt weird.
Yeah.
And so with this Moxie, you see in the ad, you see this image, or in the video, you see this image of the parents. They peek in on their boy, and he's like really lonely and playing by himself.
Hold my hand, the robot says to him. Like,
right.
Tell
and
me
so
about your
rather
day.
than, but it feels sad because rather than the parents coming in and saying, hey, let's go out to the park and play catch, it's like they think they're solving the entire loneliness problem of their kid by
That's the thing. They have enough awareness to know that the kid needs this has this lacuna in his or her life, and they have the resources, and they're tuned in enough, and they trust this thing. Why don't you just do it yourself? Like, you're a much cheaper version of Moxie. I agree 100%.
And let's say they're busy. Okay, the Moxie price was something like $1,700. Well, that pays for a lot of babysitting time too. So is this really better than like humans playing with the kid? Even if the parents didn't have time.
Yeah.
Like, so it was just, it felt off on a couple different levels.
Yeah, I agree. I think the uncanny valley. So let's see. We're going to get to the final couple of questions in a second here. So let's see. Next one, we talked about podcasting apps last time. Let me get into just a final couple of questions just in the speed round. Is it possible or not for entrepreneurs who are, could be like, Mark Zuckerberg or what, like really good at programming, but there's this concept called the Peter principle where you rise to the level of your incompetence. And that I feel like with other faculty, probably myself included, I'm really good at physics. No one ever taught me how to be a leader. Like when I have to lead a big experiment, like how does leadership really approach this concept of like, you may be good in one huge set of meta skill, like you might be the greatest stand-up comedian in the world. Doesn't mean you can run a comedy club.
Right.
Do you think that there's like an endemic attribute of someone who's good in a craft? Like you're a really good first baseman, doesn't mean you could be a coach. Like, is there a fundamental quantum tunneling process that's almost forbidden for someone who's really good at some set of very attuned meta skills to tunnel through and get to the other side? Like even Jim Simons, he was great at running a department and he was great at running a hedge fund. That, like in the ultimate analysis, I think those aren't dissimilar at all. But the difference between 0 to 1 in Peter Thiel's language, like going from like first baseman to head general manager, that's a huge gap. Or comedian, great stand-up comedian, to owning and running a successful comedy club.
Yeah. So are you saying, is it possible or is there a technique?
Is there? Yeah. Is it? Is there a technique? Is it forbidden? I guess that's the thing. Yeah. Is it possible? Is it forbidden?
It's certainly possible. I mean, look at Rodney Dangerfield, was a comedian, and he owned a club called Dangerfields, and he was successful at both. Dangerfield still exists even. And I think it's just understanding the meta skills of learning. So there's various, by the way, this assumes they have a passion for wanting to run a comedy club.
Of
Some
course.
comedians would not want to run a comedy club.
Sure.
So let's just assume they have the passion. They want to be good at it. I could list a bunch of different techniques, as I'm sure you can, but Frank Shamrock, who's one of the greatest ultimate fighting champions ever. He was a world champion in the late 90s. He told me this technique: find your plus, minus, equals. So find your mentor or virtual. They could be virtual mentors or they could be real mentors. So a virtual mentor would be, you read their books and whatever. Find your equals. So these are the people who are also doing the same thing. They're at the same level as you, and you're exchanging notes. You're able to be a little bit more honest and authentic with them. Like, oh, I'm having problems with this, but I don't want to tell my mentor yet. Like, what are you doing for this? And so you grow up as like a scene. Like the beat movement of writers, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs, or the pop art movement with Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein. And then you find your minus, which is, and this very well, if you're a teacher, as Einstein said, right? If you can't explain something simply, then you don't really understand it to begin with. And you see this even like in world chess champions. They often take the time out, even if they're the best player in the world, they'll take the time out to write a very basic, here's how to play chess sort of book, to kind of almost remind themselves of the fundamentals.
Very good. Okay, James. Well, I know you're super busy. I know you're going to relax and get to dinner with Robin. Let me finish up with, we have a bunch of other things. Maybe someday we can do another part 2, but I want to finish up part 1. And I want to read to you from your famous professor. Maybe you had him at Cornell. It's Carl Sagan over here.
I got accepted to his class, and then I decided not to take it. I should have. I regret it. I should have taken it.
Well, I would love to connect you with his widow, Ann Jurian, who runs as director, writer, producer of Cosmos, and it's coming up on a second season this September 23rd. Wow. And then his daughter, Sasha Sagan, was my Mother's Day guest, as I said earlier, and on the Into the Impossible podcast. And the two of them are just, I call them the first family of the universe. They're just so brilliant. So Carl Sagan wrote the following. He said, "What an astonishing thing a book is. It's a flat object made from a tree with flexible parts on which are imprinted lots of funny dark squiggles. But one glance at it and you're inside the mind of another person, maybe somebody dead for thousands of years. Across the millennia, an author is speaking clearly and silently inside your head, directly to you. Writing is perhaps the greatest of human endeavors or inventions, binding together people who would never know each other, citizens of distant epochs. Books break the shackles of time. A book is proof that humans are capable of working magic." So I want you to, first pick your favorite of all your books, but first pick your favorite child. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to ask you to do either one of those. I would never ask you to do one of those.
Brian Keating and All My Children Are Equal.
That's what my mom used to say. And then she'd say, I can't, I have 3 brothers. She'd say, it's like asking me, I'd say, who's your favorite? She'd say, that's like asking me to pick, which hand do I prefer, my left hand or my right hand? I said, Mom, you're left-handed. So I'd forced her, and I'm a wonderful son. I want to ask you, what do books mean to you? You've obviously written a large number, some by yourself, some with other people. I've gotten a tremendous amount out of every one of them, and I have a tie into the next one. But what do books mean to you? How do you react to that statement by Carl Sagan?
I think it's a great statement, and obviously there's 2 kinds of books, and this is obvious. There's nonfiction and there's fiction. But let's just assume we're all talking about just quality books written by really smart people. And let's for a second stick with nonfiction or autobiography or whatever. I view it as almost like being a vampire. Like, I read your book. You've worked for 20 years on, studying the origin of the universe and then constructing your idea. I get to see into your head, like how you're thinking about, well, what if we could see these other waves beyond the cosmic background radiation? And like, I start to think like how you're thinking. It's giving me ideas like, are there other waves other than light, gravity? Like, I'm starting to think, and then what would you do to sense those? And then you talk about, how the cosmic background radiation is not symmetric. This is your obsession earlier with symmetry with both hedge funds and the Earth, but it's very much related to your research, right? Like, the cosmic background radiation is not as symmetric as people thought, and this is the thing we need to detect to see what's going on. So I get to read,
granted.
PhD granted. Finally, after 30 years.
Here's my stamp. Here's my Excellent.
So I get to absorb. I'm like a vampire. I get to absorb your 25 years of work into my, like, I'm a vampire. I just suck it all in just by reading your book. It's like I drain your all your brain cells
Essence.
and put it in my brain. And then every book I read is like, if it's a good book, I'm a vampire sucking that life force in and all that knowledge. And it's great. I don't have to be a physicist now. You've lived that life for me. And then I stole your 25 years from you by reading your book. Now I'll go on to, the next book. And with fiction, it's a little similar, but a little different. You get to, if you really are into writing and can see what makes one writer different from the other, I get to absorb their entire writing style and really, now I'm them. I can write like them. Like if I wanted to, I could write like, not as good as, but I can mimic like Hemingway or Thomas Pynchon. Wouldn't be as good as them, but you would see the difference, between the styles. And I could point, you would say, oh yeah, it's like Thomas Pynchon, or it's like the minimalist, or it's maximalist, or whatever. And so I get to absorb their writing styles, and doesn't last too long. That the fiction stuff it's like a drug, and then it wears off over time. Yeah. But often before I write, I pick out, oh, I'm going to write a sad story. I'll pick out somebody who is minimalist and maybe a little sad, and absorb that style and combine it with my own in my head. And then I'm writing, at a different level. So again, it's a very vampire-like attitude towards books. But then I just love reading, and I love a good story.
Yeah, and I love that you give away all these ideas for, how you approach a book, both, we talked about later, speed reading, but actually, to extract some of that bone marrow that you just talked about. It's legitimate. It's not actually, I just want to skim and say, on page 27, you use the word, right. Outsourcing, who cares? But you're actually delving in deeply into it. But you had a recent series of tweets, which could be a little class on its own, a TikTok or whatever, on just like great opening lines. And you once said something like, every line in a book has to really impel with a gravitational force field you to read the next sentence and the next sentence and every sentence and every structure and every paragraph, next paragraph, every chapter, every page.
Yeah.
And doing that and just relentlessly curious. Like you have to be stimulating this. And that's what makes it so hard, maybe even harder than making somebody laugh. But I just want to say that I appreciate that very much. And it's something I resonate with very strongly.
And here's the thing, like Twitter's been around, 14 years.
Yeah.
People have been using it. And so again, we've been talking about idea sex. I've been wanting to combine the idea of Twitter with masterclass.com. So I've been doing these little, and I've just started doing this in the past month maybe or whatever, but I've been wanting to do these little master classes on Twitter. So what you're referring to is I did this little master class on analyzing first lines of great novels and just breaking them down. And, I did another one the other day on Gen X. I did one a few weeks ago on what really caused the events over the past 3 decades that caused the Great Recession of 2008. So I'm kind of compiling these Twitter masterclasses, and then eventually I'll print them all up. I'll flesh them out a little bit more, and I've got a book of Twitter masterclasses about everything.
Yep. Yeah, that was a rapid fire question. How do you not? I don't like to think of you as like monetizing it. I think it's not, but like ideize or kind of like just synthesizing these creative ideas that you have. But like a book is this repository, as Sagan is saying. It's basically storing this thing on parchment or whatever that can last for the only reason we know. Ryan Holiday has been on your show. He says things like the only reason we know about what Marcus Aurelius thought. I mean, this is before paper. We just take it for granted. And I was like, I was talking to Mario Livio, who wrote a book about curiosity, who'd be a great guest for you someday.
Oh, yeah,
but he was
interesting.
Yeah, he wrote a book called Why, What Makes Us Curious. And he had, he wrote a new book recently about Galileo and kind of the light of what he calls science denialism. And we went back and forth about that on my podcast. But he, he's basically talking about this book that Galileo wrote called The Dialogue, where Galileo foolishly put the words of what a character called the simpleton. He used the Pope Urban, who is the most powerful force in the universe at that time. And he put the words of the Pope in the mouth of a character named the simpleton. simpleton, simplicio. But we're talking about it, and we were saying, like, I was just remarking, like, one of Galileo's earlier books is called The Compass, and the compass has it's not like a magnetic compass, it's like a protractor, something that used to divide angles, and it's kind of like a primitive slide rule. And we went through this description. The book, which is like an instruction manual. It's funny, we don't even have instruction manuals for any technology we have. But back then, no one would have the device, but they could print up the instruction manual because it was very cheap to do it. And Galileo goes through this conversion, like you can use a slide rule type thing to convert between, Scuti in Venice to Ducati in Florence, and going through. And I was thinking, like, if you found a Ducat or whatever, it's worth, maybe some collector's value. But if you had the actual book, it's worth like $5 million. Like, nobody has this book. Like, if he had just given it to his kids, they'd be, their heirs would be multi-trillionaires by now, just every copy printed up.
Yeah,
but,
it's true. It's true. And the benefit of, like, it used to be to publish a book, you had to have an agent, and then you had to go through the pathway you described for being a professor. You had to have an agent, then a marketing company, and a book publisher likes you, the publisher likes you, editor likes you, the bookstores like you. Agent, and then finally you get the book deal. Now you can write a 3-page book and upload it to Amazon, and it's a book. And so there's millions of self-published books out there, and actually some of them are very high star rankings and sell. 50 Shades of Grey started off as self-published.
The Martian, right?
Yeah, The Martian started off as self-published. Wool, which is going to be a TV series, started off as self-published. But the whole point is you don't have to. You no longer have to publish with the goal of reaching a large audience. Somebody listening to this might want to just publish their story so their great-great-grandkids could know who they were, and no other buyers, just the great-great-grandkids.
And speaking of books, so the end of The Power of No is really touching, and it's had a big impact on me. What's unique about that book, amongst all your other books, is that it kind of contains like checklists, and more than just being a polemic or a manifesto. It's actually a step-by-step, Atul Gawande type instruction manual, a checklist to go through, like when you're feeling stuck and down or depressed and low energy, whatever. But the very end of it, you finally get to like yes, and getting to yes, to go back to the very beginning of this podcast when we were talking about Uri and how I felt this orthogonal pull between you and him at TEDx. Not really, but the last sentences of The Power of No. It's not a spoiler. I don't think I can spoil a book that's 7 or 8 years old. You say, we worship death. When someone is about to die, we often want to know what their last words will be. We want to know for several reasons. Mostly, it seems like we want to know if they see anything special, if they can see through the veil between life and the afterlife and tell us what is there. Maybe they think they see their mother or father or long-dead friends. Maybe the afterlife is one big happy reunion that lasts forever. Who knows? We don't. But maybe even more important, we want to hear their last words. And so that ties into, well, first of all, I want to thank you for these books, and I want to thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty. One of my missions, and God knows if we're successful, that'll be worth all the effort that we put into it. But like suicide in academia is not a small problem. And, I've kind of taken it upon, because I was affected so deeply by the suicide of many people that I've known, not an abnormal amount, but certainly my closest, father figure like mentor, Andrew Lang at Caltech, as I describe, when we had a podcast together. But if we can prevent it, I think you're so honest in your writing. But one thing I feel is, like, if people sat down to write what I call what's known as an ethical will, I feel like it could be a tool. It could be like what Alfred Nobel saw when he wrote his will, and he saw what happened when his brother was mistaken for him, and his death was being celebrated, as I described. And I wonder, like, what you think about in terms of your ethical will. And this is a concept in Judaism, but everybody can do. Barack Obama has written one. And that's kind of like, what wisdom or inheritance of values do you most want to communicate? And I really want to encourage people to actually physically do it in the spirit of choosing themselves, even if they don't publish it. There are tools and places to publish it. But I feel like if people sat down and thought about, like, what is not your material, because someone could be broke, and that might be the reason that they're considering such awful things and tragic to people. But if they thought about their ethical will, I wonder, if that would not maybe make them reconsider and reach out for help. But first, what would you leave in your ethical, not your material will?
Well, it's interesting because there's all sorts of values that you could say are like first order, in the sense that, okay, I want people to be, I feel like I'm an honest person. I want my kids to be honest. I want people to be honest. I feel like, treat people, the most important, statement in every religion is treat people how you would want to be treated, so there's all that. But then I think there's something that people don't think of as much. And it really comes to fore right now in this time where everything's so polarized, like on every single issue, just people arguing all day long on social media and with their friends and with their family and so on. I think there's a certain ethical aspect to being detached from everything that's going on. So it doesn't mean you don't care. Like, I care about all the issues that are happening. I care about people dying from a pandemic. I care about Black Lives Matter. But there's lots of issues in the world. Like right now, there's a genocide happening in Yemen, for instance. It's not in the news at all. It's never in the news. There's a whole big thing happening there. But it's because people attack people. There's a certain energy that these issues have in the media and on social media. So you get attached to them, and it's even considered bad if you don't get polarized in one way or the other. But I think I would encourage people to do really what I try to do, which is be a little bit detached from all of these arguments to avoid anger, to avoid putting energy. You don't want any of these issues to take up mental real estate. Like, if I focus on one issue so much that I get angry about it and I'm fighting on Twitter and I'm thinking about it, it doesn't mean I'm going to solve the problem. It doesn't mean I'm going to have any solutions any more than I would have. But if you could just take a step back, be detached, focus on your own health. Okay, instead of obsessively reading CNN, I'm going to exercise, and I'm going to eat well, and I'm going to sleep well, and I'm going to talk to my kids, and I'm going to talk to my friends and spouse, and I'm going to acknowledge I can't control this situation, so it's not really that important for me to express my opinion everywhere. So be detached. You'll actually find you're much more creative, and who knows what the outcomes of that will be. That you might have much more impact on the world by not just wholesale selling your mental real estate to every issue that's a headline in the media that week, focusing on your own health and creativity and spirituality and relationships. And then you have all your mental real estate back. And that's how you can make the most beneficial impact on the world, whatever it is. Who knows what it is? But I think that's what I would say to that. That's a sort of a choose yourself kind of philosophy, which people could say, choosing yourself, isn't that selfish? No, if you're sick in bed, and if you're not, or if you're in toxic relationships, or you're
on an airplane and it loses oxygen, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah, you put the oxygen mask on yourself, and that's how you save your baby. So, people forget that in daily life. And I think that's such an important ethical concept. And then actually it's counterintuitive because many people think the opposite.
Yeah.
So I would say if I was going to have something that's a little bit different than what they're hearing from everywhere else, that's what it would be.
Great. So continuing with this theme, going forward, the question that I ask all my guests to answer is, under a minute, can you provide a scheme to unify high energy quantum mechanics with general relativity using tensorial calculus in under 14 dimensions? So,
yeah, it's a giant simulation, and they threw that in the operating system, but our code can't access the operating system.
Exactly. Cool. Oh, wow. You first double PhD when it...
I got it.
Okay, got it too. Okay, no, seriously. If you look in the chat box, I sent you 2 videos. These are monolith scenes from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and our podcast at the Arthur C. Clarke Center derives from one of us or Arthur C. Clarke's laws that I'll get to in a minute. But the famous monolith scene from 2001 is sort of ambiguous. It makes you ask questions. Why are they doing this? Is the very first scene. The second link I sent you, which I'll put in the show notes, a black monolith is found by these primates in Africa, presumably thousands of years ago, or millions of years ago, perhaps. And these monoliths then appear later. The first link I sent you links to when they find on the moon.
Yeah.
And these are like devices that are maybe warnings or maybe oracles and kind of giving information. And what I want to ask you is what now we talked about ethical, spiritual kind of energy you want to send to the future. What material thing, what signature, of our existence, of your existence, would you want to put in a billion-year-old time capsule to be discovered by some, future civilization?
Yeah. It's weird because I'm a very minimalist in the way I live. Like, for a long time I lived with no belongings at all except what I could fit into a carry-on bag, and I didn't even rent or own. I just lived in Airbnbs. So whenever I think of like objects to give or get, it's like almost like this blind spot for me. So I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if I would care about a future civilization. So I'm minimalist in the things I care
that
about.
You're gonna, you'll save on postage to the future too. That's
right.
Last question. Now we've gone 2 questions into the deep future. Now I want to go into the past. So the title of the podcast, Into the Impossible, derives from Sir Arthur's so-called third law, which is after the second law, which is for every expert, there's an equal and opposite expert. I'm sure
I love that one.
Encountered one. First one being for any sufficiently advanced technology, or any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And then this third law is one that's really quite interesting, and in fact, it caused us to choose it for the name of this podcast. And that is, the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. So I want to ask advice to your former self. What thing, what aspect, what mystery of life, if you will, seemed impossible when you were a 20-something that now makes perfect sense because you had that experience of going into the impossible?
I mean, I guess a lot of different things, which is, I have like some simple examples. Like, as I learn new skills, I always experiment to get out of my comfort zone bit by bit to learn. That's my whole philosophy of learning, is to experiment rather than deliberate practice. But I think for me, I didn't know, and this is very vulnerable, but I didn't know it was, I was dealing with this. But I think simply having confidence in myself was impossible for me until recently. No matter what I did, no matter what successes I had, I was always felt like I had to pander or show people some other version of myself than who I was in order for them to like me. So just simply being myself was a very impossible thing for me, even 10, 15 years ago.
What's done it for you? I mean, being a best-selling author, you've gotten into good shape. I can tell since I saw you last, you're definitely living much more healthy nowadays. Getting married. I mean, what do you attribute it to?
I think being disgusted with most things, like realizing that I don't really need to have status for myself, but nor do I need to assume everyone else has so much greater status over me. And so just being like disgusted with most things in the world has given me, a sense that I don't really need to like try to convince anybody that I'm good. That's like a negative answer. But at the same time, yeah, knowing that I can go broke repeatedly and come back from that, knowing that I could have horrible, disastrous situations in my personal life and I could come back from it. No matter what happens to me, I know I could bounce back. And so after that, I just don't care anymore. If someone doesn't think highly of me that I wanted them to think highly of me, then they were not the right person for me. And that's always usually advice people give, but I wasn't really living that advice.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of the Wikipedia lookup table shows you under resiliency. I think you've come through so much and you've been so successful. But the most important thing, I want to thank you for influencing to the good so many people. I know you said there's so many bad things in the world. I think that there's so many bad people in the world. I think the world is a beautiful, magical place. And I know
Yeah.
I kind of see you as this Schrodinger's cat. You're kind of like the most pessimistic optimist or the most optimistic pessimist that I know. And that's a trait that I associate with success, because the hardest thing in life is to maintain that Schrodinger's like balance. Like, why is it so easy to be polarized? Because you're polarized. It's a stable equilibrium. You're like, that's why you see people, they become religious. They go all the way in, or they renounce all their faith all the way out. But it's very hard to be at the top of that hill, because any slight perturbation, any gust of wind, you're going to be displaced. You're going to be unstable. You're going to be free falling through life. And so people like to do what we call in physics collapse the wave function. What is it? Is it a live cat or is it a dead cat? But no, sometimes you have to live with that uncertainty. And by feeling that uncertainty, and those and you see that Eric Weinstein talks about this, and like, why are people so polarized about abortion? Like, I'm not going to get political. I always say, my podcast is completely apolitical, because nobody looks up and says, I hate that constellation over there. That freaking constellation sucks. I hate it. I'm pro Andromeda.
But that's a good example. Like, just to mention, like, I have a business partner on the investing side of my life, and we've worked together since 1999, so 21 years. And I'm pro-choice, and he is religiously pro-life, as is half the country. Half the country's one, half the country's the other. And I always tell people, we've never once had an argument. We've discussed pro-choice, pro-life, and we've had disagreements on business, but we always disagreement's different than arguing. This is where you kind of don't want to rent mental real estate to things that aren't important. Like, I'll listen to him. He knows where I stand. We don't argue and move on. And he connects the dots his way. I connect the dots my way. And my whole view is on optimism versus pessimism is that it doesn't really matter so much as it is that we, like you say, we be calm in the not knowing. Like, we be comfortable with uncertainty. So let's just I'll take this hot potato issue. It's uncertain what the right thing is, ethically, morally, religiously, whatever, biologically, on pro-choice versus pro-life. Is there a heartbeat in the first second? Is there a heartbeat after 8 months? Like, nobody, right. There's a line there. No one knows where it is, and no one even tries to define it. It's beyond science somehow, but it's not beyond legal. I'm pro-choice. But the key for me is not to convince anyone, because I'm not. The key for me is for people to be calm about the uncertainty. And that's what I like to always do in my books, even in my comedy, is just to kind of diffuse the polarization a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, Eric, just to close out that anecdote with Eric Weinstein, he says, like, nobody says that life begins before conception, right? Like, when the husband and wife are on the couch, before anything happens, no one says, oh, there's a life, right? And nobody disagrees that there's a life after the baby's born. I mean, the guy at what's his name at Princeton University, who claims that there should be some choice. Anyway, the audience is screaming at me, but nobody disagrees that it's alive after it's born. So it's in that intermediate state when it's not the living cat, the dead cat. And you think about that with any super controversial. Like, I look at it through that lens, and Eric turned me on to it, and it's because the human mind is so uncomfortable with quantum mechanics in a sense, like, and it translates directly to this notion, like Second Amendment. Like, nobody would say that, like, no one human being in the country should ever have a gun, period. Like, even I don't know, I don't want to get into politics, but like, on the other side, like, no one say, like, you have to have a howitzer and an anti-tank missile in everybody's garage. Like, no, even the NRA doesn't think that, right? So like, but in between, there's this quantum superposition where the human mind just is incapable of splitting that difference and living with it. But in the quantum world, it doesn't matter. The cat is live and dead in a certain sense. And I think that just really reflects how unusual and how and perhaps only the human mind is capable of maintaining that dichotomy simultaneously.
But it's very hard, though. People don't enjoy that feeling, right, of uncertainty. But the thing is, here's the other question is, and I know for the sake of the math and the experiment and the thought experiment in quantum mechanics, this cat experiment exists. Mm-hmm. But why do we even care if it's alive or dead? Like, my whole thing is, most things I don't need to think about. Like, no one's asking me to make a Supreme Court decision on
Right.
pro-choice.
No, I'd say that too. I'm like, if the Higgs boson is like really important to your daily life, consult a therapist because like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then it might be, but like, I'm interested in the Higgs boson just because it's fun.
Yeah.
Like, that's a fun thing.
Right. But it's beyond a certain point, you're not that interested. Like, you'd be pursuing it, like, it's interesting, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
And like, okay, the pandemic, I'm interested in the numbers, but like, there's more people dying in other parts of the world right now from wars that we've started or whatever. So why don't people care about that? Like, the key is to not ask why about the things you're interested in and passionate about, but to ask why without caring about the outcome, because we don't know. That's why we're asking why. And then to not ask why about things that are much more easier to be detached from. Like, okay, I don't want my dad to die of coronavirus. So, Dad, be careful. But for myself, actually, I don't really care so much.
Right, the New York Knicks, center, he's probably not going to get it.
Right.
Yeah. So just to close out, and one final anecdote related to both Father's Day and to abortion. On my 30th birthday,
you were aborted.
My father said, I believe in abortion up until the 90th trimester. So I said, great. That's great, Dad. Thanks.
Okay. I once had a bit similar to that on comedy. It did not work because no matter what, there was no way to make it work.
You can't make jokes about like the Holocaust or,
I make jokes about the Holocaust. Yes.
Okay. Well, keep that. Let's save that for the next part.
I'll just give you the clue because this is huge material in this one. It's like when you find a mine that you could drill where there's huge, you realize, oh my gosh, this is the biggest gold mine in the world. It's exciting. So on Google Maps, everything is reviewed. Every location you can write a review for. So Auschwitz has thousands of reviews.
Right.
So just that concept is funny. And then when you actually read the reviews, it's just like a gold mine.
Yeah, I know. I went down to 9/11 to the ground zero, and I'm like $44. Like, it's just but people are paying it, right? And it has reviews too. Exactly what I found. Well, James, speaking of fathers, I want to wish you a happy Father's Day.
You too, man.
I hope you get a couple of moxies for yourself. Keep you busy. I know you're lonely sometimes too. I want to thank you seriously from the depths of my heart for all the good that you didn't know that you were doing in my life. I'm just
thank you, Brian. I mean, you're a superstar, so it's a high praise for you to say that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
If you enjoyed this episode of Into the Impossible, please subscribe, comment, share, rate, and review. For a chance to win a free copy of our most recent guest's newest book, send a screenshot of your review to info@imagine.ucsd.edu. We appreciate hearing from you and are always open to your suggestions for future episodes. For more information, go to imagination.ucsd.edu. Find us on Twitter @ImagineUCSD. Watch us on YouTube, listen on iTunes. Into the Impossible is a production of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination in the Division of Physical Sciences at the University of California, San Diego. Eric Veary, Director. Brian Keating, Co-Director.